there, and welcome to With Respects for Food first video post about how to start your own worm bin. What you're going to need to start a worm bin is 2 Rubbermaid Tupperware bins used for storage. The 2 I have here are about 18 gallons. You only need 1 lid. You need a drill. This is a 3/32 drill bit. You want it to be smaller than 1/8 of an inch. You don't want your worms to be escaping out of the holes. You want them to stay in the bin. So you want to use a small drill that we'll use to drill some air holes in a minute. You also need risers of some sort. These happen to be plastic drinking cups, the sturdy type. You're going to put them in the bottom bin, and it'll hold the top bin up a little bit so your worm tea can drain, and we'll get to that in a little while. Your first step is going to be the bin with the lid. It's going to be the top bin. This is where the worms and the compost is actually going to be contained. You're going to drill anywhere from about 20 to 30 holes in the top here for air, as well as right along the top rim, probably about 5 holes per side. I'll get to that. So now I've got holes here in my lid, as well as holes around under the rim on the top of the bin. Lastly, we want to drill about 6 holes here on the bottom of the bin. It's where the liquid is going to build up. So here mine has a little bit of a raised part. I want to drill my holes there because it's where the liquid will pool in the bottom. The way the bins will go together, on your bottom bin without any of the holes, you're going to place your risers. Instead of plastic cups, you could also use empty yogurt cartons turned upside down, maybe some other sort of plastic carton that you have left over. You just need about 4 of them to keep this top bin raised up, like so. And then this lid will go on top. Now what you need to add is some bedding. The best bedding to use is newspaper. It's what we use. Left over after you read it, rip it into strips about 1 inch wide, and you want it for the first starting your worm bin, probably about 3 inches of newspaper in the bottom. In your worm bin, you should have your newspaper, your bedding. The next step is to add your worms. I ordered mine from an online company. They're based in South Florida. That's where they grow their worms. They send out to people. It's called Kazari Worm Farm. I'm sure you can find one in your area by do a quick search on the internet. I ordered my worms. They were 30 bucks for 1 pound of worms. It ended up being about 1,000 worms is what they say. It got to me within 3 business days, I believe, and I picked it up. Outside the box says live animals. It's all sorts of official. Add your worms once you get them to your bedding, as well as a little bit of kitchen scraps. You can put in any fruit and vegetable scraps, scraps from eggshells, your coffee grounds along with the filter. Same with tea bags, as long as they're the type that don't have the metal staple. Put those all in the bin, because the worms will compost them down, and turn it into compost. What I have here is my old bin. You can see it's a lot smaller, which is why we're upgrading to another bigger bin. Inside my bin, you'll see my layer of newspaper, and underneath the newspaper, you'll see we had some lettuce, some cabbage. Those were our scraps that we threw in there. It'll take about 3 months for your worms to turn compost, or turn your food scraps into compost, and you're constantly going to be adding layers to the top. And once you add a layer of food scraps, you're going to add a layer of bedding, newspaper, and so on and so forth, and the worms will compost it down. So the compost will actually be at the bottom of your bin. And to get it out, you'll have to do some fancy maneuvering. Some people lay a layer of screening in their bin and continue to add fresh scraps and bedding on top of it, with the thought that the worms will migrate up through the screening, compost the stuff on the top. Then you just take the screen out with the worms and all the fresh stuff, take the compost out of the bottom, and put the screen back. with all your worms. I'm going to use a different method. I'm actually going to take the top layers off that are not composted yet, add them to my new bin. We have the luxury of having 2 bins to do this. And then take the bottom layers of the compost, spread it out on the sheet of plastic, give it a couple minutes here in the sun. Worms don't like sun, they don't like being hot, so they will go to the bottom of the compost pile, where I can then scrape off the top, which will hopefully be worm-free, use that in my garden, and then put the bottom stuff with all the worms back into my bin. I have some makeshift plastic gloves out of these plastic bags, because I really don't want to be touching all the decaying food. So now that I'm getting down to parts that don't have big pieces of food particles, I'm laying it down on the tarp in a pile so the worms will start migrating to the bottom. When I find pieces of food, I'm just going to start adding it to my other bin. So at this point, I have my brand new bin with all of its holes on risers, second bin on top, layer of bedding, then my layer of worms, which I got from my old box, composted out the stuff that was composted, and then on top of that I have another layer of bedding. This is our stripped up newspaper, another 2 or 3 inches worth. The last thing that you need is just a spray bottle. I got mine, I think, at the dollar store for 98 cents. You're going to give it a fine mist on top. You want your newspaper to be damp, not to the point where you squeeze it and water comes out, but definitely the wetter side of damp. I've found when I don't have enough bedding, damp bedding that is on the top, then that's when my worm bin sort of starts to smell a little bit, as well as that's when it attracts bugs, because obviously the decaying and composting food scraps at that point is exposed. So you want to make sure you have enough bedding on top and that it's misted well. From that point, you put your lid on. You put it in a safe place inside your house. You want it to be about 75 degrees, constant temperature. For us, we have a little spot in our laundry room. It takes about 3 months for the worms to compost the food down, like I said. And again, it'll be in layers. The uncomposted stuff on top, the composted stuff at the bottom. I mentioned earlier about worm tea, which is actually the liquid that you'll get at the bottom of your second bin. You can see in this one, it's just a whole bunch of black, brownish black liquid. These were my old risers. They were yogurt cups, but my bin got too heavy and crushed them, as you can see, which is why I switched to those plastic sturdy cups. And this worm tea is a great liquid fertilizer, as well as it helps a little bit with pest control. It'll keep certain bugs away. We have another little spray bottle that we put it in. You spray it on top. If not, mix it with some water and use it to water your plants. So this compost I can now use in my plants. I've got some stuff to put in pots that I will use the compost in. This smaller bin I will now start afresh, just like we did with the big one, adding more worms, more bedding, and then we'll have 2 dual bins going.